we now move to item number 14, which is a noting paper only, open process paper, the nomination or renomination of a person to the University of Auckland Animal Ethics. Councillor Walker, you wish to move that? And I have a seconder, please. Councillor Simpson. All those in favour, please say aye. To the contrary, no. Carried. Councillors, we still have 7 more papers, so I just detect from the restlessness in the room that you'd like to get through these. So could I invite Edward Siddle and Alistair Cameron to the table to discuss the shareholder comments on the revised CCO statements of intent for 2020-2023. And for the sake of putting it on the table, could I ask Deputy Mayor Bill Cashmore and Councillor Angela Dalton to move and second. It's been moved and seconded. It's on the table. Not sure whether Ed or Alistair is going to speak. You've been nominated by Ed, Alistair, so it's you.
Yes.
We're all going to speak.
Yes. Look, I'll try to take a leaf out of Stephen's book and not say too much, but
could I just please have some order around the table, please? It's a little hard to hear.
I'll just give a very brief introduction to this before I hand over to the team to talk through the specific CCOs, but I would just like to talk briefly about how we've got to where we've got to, because it's not like your average statement of intent process. As per normal, letters of expectation were sent out to the CCOs in December last year. We received the draft statements of intent from the CCOs by the 1st of March, which largely responded to the letters of expectation, and then COVID somewhat got in the way. So following decisions made about the proposed emergency budget, we asked the CCOs to come back to us with revised statements of intent that reflected the budget that went out for consultation. We've only just received back the revised draft statements of intent from the CCOs, and we're proposing some comments to make on those revised drafts today. In the normal course of events, the final statements of intent will be due back from the CCOs by the 30th of June. That will not be possible. The legislation allows us to grant them a 1-month extension, and that's what we're asking to do. I'd just like to mention some of the general comments we've made against all of the CCO's statements of intent before handing over to the team to discuss some more specific feedback on individual SOIs. There's a couple of rather technical comments we've included in the report around the presentation of financial information within the statements of intent to get some consistency there. We've also asked that all the statements of intent include a statement of how the procedures that the CCOs must follow if they're acquiring shares in another company. That's a requirement of the Local Government Act. There's some general comments around the key performance indicators in the statements of intent. A lot of the KPIs in the statements of intent come from the LTP. A lot of those targets will be affected due to the COVID situation, both in terms of the activities that the CCOs are able to undertake, plus the funding that is available for them. So we're proposing that the CCOs amend their targets, or where they're amending them due to COVID-related circumstances, that they continue to show the LTP target, because we cannot change those without a special consultative procedure, but show a revised target which might be more realistic so we can hold them accountable to that. And it's probably just a general comment that I think a lot of the KPIs will need to be reviewed through the LTP process, which we'll be embarking on very shortly. Probably the final general comments I would like to make relate to the emergency budget. The draft budget that's gone out for consultation includes a target of some $5 million of savings to be found across the group with greater use of shared services. The proposed comments that we're suggesting ask that the CCOs actively look for these savings. An area such as a centrally managed corporate property portfolio. There'll be other areas to explore, but that's one specific suggestion that we're making. The final SOIs must reflect the decisions in the emergency budget and discussions that will happen in the workshops leading up to those decision making. So there's a series of workshops you're about to begin before final decision making. So there'll be some strong indications given in those workshops and decisions made in the emergency budgets which need to be reflected through into the final statements of intent. And I think that the final point before I sign off is that there is the possibility that the CCO's revenue may bounce back quicker than what is anticipated. Public transport revenue, visitation revenue at the zoos, and such like. We haven't mentioned in the report, but I think it's worth signalling that if there is a greater than expected increase in revenue, that may increase your available debt headroom to be invested in capital programs. I just think it's worth noting that should be a decision of you as a governing body, where that capital expenditure may happen, rather than if the bounce back happens in an individual CCO that they might apply that to their own capital programs. It may be that the priorities lie elsewhere in the group, whether it be in drought response or greater investment in transport, whatever it is. I think it's worth signalling that decision should rest with you rather than wherever the bounce back in the revenue might be strongest. That's a hypothetical. We don't know if it will bounce back, but I think it's worth sending that signal. That's it for the general comments from me. Not sure how you'd like to run this, Mr. Mayor. Maybe if there's any questions on those before we move in, just go through individual CCO by CCO.
Okay, let's. That sounds like it could take quite a long time.
Or should we take the report as read?
Why don't we? What we're doing here is we're sending comments back to the CCOs with suggested changes to their SOIs, but in the knowledge that may change by the time we get that back, because the emergency budget will have been presented. The CCO review will have been presented. So this is not our last say, is my guess, on the draft statement of intent. I'd hate us to spend 5 hours now debating draft statements of intent that will change fundamentally by the time we actually put them in, because of those two factors, the emergency budget and the draft CCO review. So why don't we just get some general comments, questions and comments around what Alistair and his team are planning to go back to the CCOs with. So I'll take comments and questions together on the whole thing, I think. So I have Councillor Walker first, Councillor Coombe second, Councillor Mulholland, Councillor Deputy Mayor Cashmore, and Councillor Simpson, and let's go there. Wayne.
Sure.
Councillor Walker.
So I'll speak to point 50 and point 61. Point 50 is about Panuku, and in particular the sentence, this paragraph would benefit from being clearer on the council's role with regard to property decisions. Now, the particular concern that I have as a councillor with Panuku is that we make a decision that something gets sold, but irrespective of what the sale price is, sometimes it's a fire sale and we get in my view, shocking return from it. We don't have oversight over that. There isn't a process where they're coming back to us. This is particularly in an instance where we're selling assets that have a return, and our financial position is actually worse off in terms of our debt and our reduced revenue. We would be far better in some instances to actually retain the asset conceivably for a rainy day, but at least to benefit from the ongoing revenue stream and to alleviate potential risk. So I have a real concern that the words here need to be a bit more explanative so that Panuku is under no illusion that we're actually interested in the investment advice, and investment is a critical consideration. So that's one point through you, Mr. Mayor. The other one goes to 61, which goes to RFA, and particularly around the words performance trends and transparency, and my emphasis is around the word transparency. So I continue to have information withheld to me as a councillor, even when I last asked it at an emergency meeting of this council around a breakdown of the cost and revenue and capital centres for stadiums. And Mr. Monk, who was presenting, told me I would receive that, but again I've had to generate another email around that. And this is at a point where I'm trying to exercise my governance through the emergency budget procedure. So, in my view, it's critical that we're more explanative in that respect. It was referred to, I remember, in a previous statement of intent about 3 years ago, but we don't appear to have followed up on it. So can we have some more precise wording around that, so that as governors, our ability to monitor and manage is reflected on the basis of the quality of the information that we have? And then I'd invite a response from Alistair. And I support you on the bounce back too.
Through the chair, I think the issue around property sales is, I think that's information that you should be provided with. All property sales come to this group in the Finance and Performance Committee for your decision whether or not to sell those assets. And part of that financial information you should receive when you're making those decisions is what is the return you're making on that property, and therefore what will be the impact on your debt and revenue positions if you decide to sell it. And I'd suggest that that's where that information should be provided to you so you can make an informed decision about whether an asset should be cleared for sale or not. In relation to RFA, look, we'll follow up specifically with RFA on that. I think my comment would be that the information you receive as governors should be to inform decisions that you make at a governance level and not management information. That's information for the individual CCOs, but if the information you require is required for the decisions you're making and oversight of them, we'll have that discussion directly with RFA. I apologise, I don't know the information you're referring to in that particular instance, but we can follow up on that.
Councillor Coombe.
Thank you. There's a huge amount to kind of cover, so I'm just going to hone in on the climate impact statement at paragraph 101. And it's very concerning to read that there's a lack of clarity around climate change responses and broader environmental initiatives. But then I'm very curious that it goes on to state in the second paragraph, and I would agree that we need to get the CCOs to clearly indicate their planned activities, but where it then seems to go a bit wonky is that I would have thought we're asking the CCOs to indicate their planned activities against our climate action plan. So when I look at Auckland Transport's statement of intent, it says up front that the climate plan is one of the strategic documents that they're responding to, so that's great. But then you're giving them a big out by saying it's climate change and or broader environmental outcomes. And I cannot see how in any respect there should be an or there, because they're not the same thing. And we're either being very clear that we have a climate framework and the SOIs need to respond to that, or we're not. So it's a concern, a big concern when I go back through the SOIs to try and see what. Still have to stay here for the rest of the day. Yeah. So I guess the question is, in terms of strengthening their climate respond. I mean, we need to be really clear what we're asking them to do. We've got a climate action plan, it's going to be signed off in July. Do the SIs respond to that? I'd have thought that's how basic it needs to be. But why have we got this or in that statement, and what's meant by that?
I'm happy to delete the or, and I think the issue is we haven't signed off the climate action framework, and once we do, we can then assess whether the statements of intent respond to that.
Well, I would say we have signed off on the target, and we signed off on the framework, and we signed off on the principle. So there is very much a strategic framework in which they should be responding to. So, I mean, part of the response might be that those actions are going to be considered as part of the LTP, but I see, like with Auckland Transport's SOI, they're just deleting the actions out of the SOI because they don't now see them as relevant, where even whatever budget scenario we have, they still have got to tell us how they're responding.
Yeah, look, the final point in the Auckland Transport section does refer to the fact that work on the Auckland Climate Action Plan is, the Auckland Climate Plan is, has been deleted, and we've had discussions with Auckland Transport, and they're really happy to put that back in and have those discussions. I think that there's a real willingness there. It's just got lost in the process this time round.
Okay, so can I just clarify, Mr. Chair, in terms of this process of us giving feedback, the resolution's quite wide in terms of it saying that the comments back will be based on the feedback, I think it says, that we discuss now. Is this, we're not actually resolving on it, but you're taking this feedback on board? Does it just need to be confirmed in some way? That
Even
will
more
be picked up?
importantly, our officers are taking that feedback back, and that will be reflected in the document that they give to myself and the Deputy Mayor to sign off. So your or has been deleted and your other comments have been taken on board by Alistair and the team.
Right, okay,
I think,
thank you.
Mr. Mayor and Councillor, just for clarity to help us, it wouldn't be an efficient use of time to pass a resolution on everybody's comments such as yours, but if the general mood around the table is yes, that's a comment we'll...
Yeah. It's, they're not going to cross every T and dot every I, but they're picking up the sense of what councillors are saying. Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Simpson.
Thank you, Your Worship. I don't want to stem debate, but I just want to say that actually I think my view on this is that we should just pass this as it is, because it's almost null and void tomorrow, in a couple of weeks, isn't it? We haven't done the emergency budget, and I don't mean to be disrespectful to staff. I think you've done a fantastic job, but I think that in the interests of where we are, if we had any further things to say to the CCOs as a result of the emergency budget, and I believe we will, because obviously money will drive a whole lot of other things as well, well then that's the time to potentially add another letter that might say something along the lines of, further to our statements of intent, we just want to emphasise the following as it's just, look, I looked at this and thought, actually, I could spend a lot of time over it, or I could just let it go. And with respect, I went for the latter due to the extenuating circumstances we're in, and to that end, Your Worship, if I wasn't stopping democracy, I would say put it to the vote and keep going.
Thank you. Just to get clarification, they will be required, the CCOs in any case, to take on board what's in our emergency budget, because that's their direction to them on financial matters. That's absolutely correct. In the event that there's significant change to the CCOs arising out of the CCO review, we would make around this table or around the CCO Oversight Committee, I'm not quite sure which one it'll be, but all of us here will make the decision as to how there may be changes in the CCOs, and if there were to be a deletion, well, you wouldn't need the statement of intent. If there were to be an amalgamation, you would probably have to come back and give you further advice as to a new statement of intent for a new amalgamated body or replacement body. That's correct, isn't it, Alistair? That's why I agree with Councillor Simpson. We could spend a long time on this, but it will be subject to, they will be subject to the our annual budget, the emergency budget, and we will have to change it for whatever changes we decide to take from the CCO review. Okay, thank you. Councillor Cashmore, Deputy Mayor Cashmore.
You're just taking words right out of my mouth, Mr. Mayor. It's the same thing. I'm seeing we're going to have a capital program review. We got probably about 6 months' time, something like that, 5, 6 months' time. We've got the CCO review and implementation. It's going to change a lot of this potentially. And the other thing is a bit more of a standardisation of a template for the following year's ones. I think might be all helpful for everybody, a bit more of that sort of, like we did for audit and risk, or a template for them to actually deliver by would be helpful. That'd be my only comment. Other than that, there's too much uncertainty, Mr. Mayor. We just need to push this through.
Thank you very much. Councillor Casey.
Couple of things that you would expect from me to say, but I agree with Desley that this will all change, but these things won't. And one is somebody has to look at the Water Utility Consumer Assistance Trust that Watercare uses, because you're suggesting in the statement of intent to add more, give more money to it and give it more publicity. I don't think it works. It doesn't serve Pacifica well, it doesn't serve Maori well. And the last time I read their stats, they actually get paid more money than they get back for water care in debt. So something needs to happen. So I'm not for throwing more money at it. I need something, a review of that, especially given people are not going to be able to pay their water bills, which brings me on to my next comment, which you're expecting from me again, is water restriction should never be used as a means of debt enforcement, especially now. So those two things. And the only other thing I wanted to say was AT needs to tell me how they are going to work with local boards, especially if local boards' budgets get cut and there's even less money. Because what we're telling them to do is to support local economic development. And I'm unclear as to what mechanism they are going to use to do that. So that could be beefed up in any communications with them. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm just looking back to your comments, Councillor, on the Water Utility Consumer Assistance Trust, but I'm imagining, notwithstanding the broader comments you made, that you wouldn't be against a greater promotion of the availability of it and to increase its funding.
I am against it. I don't think it works. I don't want to throw more money at something that's not working. I want a better working mechanism for dealing with people who are going to come to them and say, I can't pay my bills. Because this ain't the way to do it. And we've been doing this for years and nothing ever happens.
We can, I think in the short term, I understand Watercare actually already reviewing the funding they give to it with the idea of giving it more. So I don't know that it's an immediate thing that can be turned around, but I think certainly if there is a desire for a review to see how effective it is, then that's something we can put in there. I think probably, that won't happen overnight, but I think that, yeah, we can certainly put that in there.
Promoting it, absolutely. It shouldn't just be Watercare. Auckland Council should be promoting it. I still don't understand why we can't, because that was another thing I've tried to get Auckland Council to promote that trust. But because it belongs to Watercare, it's not up to us to do that. And times have changed right now. The community needs to know there's assistance there for them.
Thank you. Councillor Mulholland.
Thanks, Your Worship. Sorry, there may have been some confusion. I was saying I would go on after Phil, but anyway, I actually did take a lot of time to read the information that we were sent, and now I'm wondering whether I should have spent so much time late at night reading them, given.
No, Phil.
Anyway, so I agree with the work that you have done in your report, and thank you for that. So I do want to go to the consistency of these, and I know it may seem minor, but when we have these agreements, I would also like to see some sort of template so that we have got consistency. Now, I picked up consistencies in different places because obviously they've got to respond to certain elements. So I agree with the Deputy Mayor on that. I think that's really important because I can tell you they all look all over the place when you actually read them all. They're not, it's all over the place. But really good information, there's no doubt about it, except for where there were huge gaps on funding in some of them and there were numbers in the others. So again, some sort of, inconsistencies, which that's obvious that I shouldn't have really read them so thoroughly. One of the things I do have with regards to ATs, and I note on page, sorry, I've got very poor eyesight, so I'll have to 9. Or maybe the number's little. It says the measures to be finalised in consultation with the council. I really want us to talk with them about actually the money, and I'm pretty sure everyone that knows me knows it's going to come from me. You know, there's a lot of money spent in local boards from a local board fund, which is not large anyway, on local ED. And these plans, in my view, and for what has been said in here, are not working well. One of the concerns I have is just with regards to the combining, and it's somewhat similar to something Pippa raised where it says bids and local boards, you know, so actually they're two separate entities, they're entirely, and so I don't want those mushed in the same sentence. And whilst that might be minor, it means there is some, it takes away from the bids and what they do. Also, I don't believe actually that the methods that are right around just dishing out 10 grand to that board, 20 grand to that board for local ED plans is working well, and it is not a good use of our ratepayers' funds. And I think we should look collectively at that and how they're going to work, because they still mention the local boards and their plans, but why not say 3 boards could work together? Because, you know, we all have to work together, and that's just part of democracy and how we work. So that might be a consideration that AT might take. And I do absolutely support their work on economic development. I think that's very positive, and I think the elements that they have written, and just in case you are confused about that, so page 8, what they will do refers to with bids and local boards. I'm sorry, they're separate entities, so just a bit of, out of all of them, that I actually did even read the Manukau Beautification Trust documentation as well, which I thought, you know, it's pretty clear they don't have the same resources as these organisations to do that mahi. So, you know, I do think that seems a little bit biased and a bit unfair on the Beautification Trust. They should be given more support to do that work, or the others maybe don't put so much ratepayers' money into it. But great work, thank you, and I'm looking forward to the review.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Richard Hills.
Thank you, Mayor. I guess to follow on from Pippa Coombe, the climate statement from us, from staff, says there's a lack of clarity, and we suggest CCOs clearly indicate. How are we going to more than suggest they clearly indicate? And the other thing is, it's not specific enough, the comment in the agenda around the specifics, because there are some CCOs that are doing great work, and they actually commented throughout their SOIs on what they're doing, and I've met with all of the CCOs, and they're actually doing much more work on climate than many of them are saying in their SOIs. So how can we ensure that that information, by the time it comes across us next time, that it's in the documents, maybe louder, but also how are we ensuring that it's not just suggesting, we make it, because we wouldn't just suggest them to have a health and safety plan or suggest them to show their financials, we require that. So I'm not sure how we can require, but, you know, even seeing AT's removing of climate in their statement under, because of the budget cuts, it sort of, to me, is a non-negotiable part of their whole work, everything they do. So I don't understand how that could be even considered, that they could just remove some of that planning and prioritization around climate. So yeah, I guess just for me, the comment 101 doesn't really match up with what we want them to do, and it doesn't really cover the good stuff in some of the SOIs. So just maybe a little bit of clarity around that. Sorry.
Through the chair, we can, you know, when the actual formal feedback gets provided, we can strengthen that wording from suggest to require. I think in terms of the comment you made about Auckland Transport, as Ed mentioned before, we've already had that discussion about them removing that from the statement of intent, and they're happy to put that back in. Sorry, Ed.
I was just going to add that essentially it was an oversight taking the work with Auckland Council on the climate plan out.
Oh, there's a large degree of scepticism around the room that taking that out is an oversight. If it was, I'm not sure whether it reflects better or worse on the organisation. Anyway, I think Councillor, under 45, the last bullet point, it's quite clearly stated that they will be putting the collaboration on the Auckland Climate Plan back in. And if it was an oversight, it was a bad oversight. If it was deliberate, it's even worse.
But just, sorry, Mayor, just the other thing is, on something so important like the climate impact statement in our agendas, potentially it could be a bit more specific. Maybe, I don't know, if you're going to say some CCOs, maybe list, because it doesn't give direction, and it also doesn't really give direction for the public. If they read that, they kind of lump everyone in, because there is some really good work under many of the SOIs. So it's just trying to balance out the ones that are doing what we hope they are doing and the ones that are not. So just trying to, I don't know how we display that more easily, but yeah, thanks.
Yeah, looking through the chair, I should probably apologise for this. This report was thrown together in sort of record time due to when we received the draft statements of intent back, so we perhaps haven't been as detailed as we could have been in some aspects. And I think you touched on a good point before, Councillor Hills, that there is actually a lot of good work being done here by the CCOs, and there's actually an opportunity here for them to tell the story better. So I think that's part of the feedback that we can provide.
Thank you. Councillor Newman.
Thank you. Good afternoon. The SOIs have to pass. Understanding the timing of the budgetary discussions and the requirement probably for further adjustments to KPIs to reflect the changing financial landscape, which is not good at the moment, that is challenging, as well as the CCO review. So understanding that, I will vote for the statements of intent today, or certainly for the comments and the feedback, and to agree the recommendations. Just a couple points from me. I think that with respect to climate change action and mitigation, part of this it is very much influenced in part not only by the council but also too by the funding and the regulatory environment that applies from central government too. So I do want to acknowledge Auckland Transport's challenge here, because as much as they want to respond to us, they are also responding to a very difficult environment, which actually restricts them from being able to give effect to many of the things we'd like them to do, but they simply can't. My real issue, though, is RFA, and I accept the relevant areas for inclusions that has been suggested in the report in relation to asset management plan review and transparency. Good. Working closely with council on developing the long-term strategic approach to stadium. Gosh, that's so overdue. When are we ever going to have that? I mean, I am so tired of, I'm just so tired of not having this discussion. We did have an experience of that some years ago with Collindale and Western Springs, and I assume that everybody just decided to get back in their foxholes, but it's just like, we can't be there forever. We do actually have to bring this matter to a head. I am concerned when I discover RFA submitting on resource consent applications by the Eden Park Trust Board, but I haven't heard from RFA about Stadia in goodness knows how many years now, despite the fact that these stadia, which are a big part of their portfolio, we know trigger discussion about tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars worth of unrealised capital liability. So I take the wording that you're proposing, but frankly, I don't know why I haven't heard from Mr. Brooks and Mr. Barnes on this for forever. And the questions that I asked during the lockdown have not been responded to. They simply are AWOL. And I would be very grateful if, beyond the statement of intent, we could actually have this discussion, because otherwise we'll be having the discussion via the CCO review, and it might be a rather different discussion. Thank you.
Sorry, thank you very much. Right, we now come to a vote on the recommendations. So it's been moved and seconded. I'll put the recommendations. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. I declare it carried. Item